Hello, I'm Dilek Tuna. You're watching A News. Let's see the headlines. Donald Trump threatens economic warfare against Iran and penalties for those it keeps ties with. At least 13 are killed and dozens injured in Kyiv amid a massive Russian missile attack on Ukraine's capital. And Turkey looks set to host another summit of the so-called Regional Four Group amid the ongoing tensions in the Middle East. US President Donald Trump has announced what he calls economic warfare against Iran and consequences for those that maintain trade links and ties with Tehran. In a post on his Truth Social site, Trump said Iran has failed to take the opportunity to make a deal over Hormuz.
US President Donald Trump has threatened what he called tremendous economic consequences for any country that helps Iran or continues doing business with the country. In a Truth Social post, Trump announced what he described as the most crushing economic operation ever imposed on a country, saying Tehran had failed to reach a deal with Washington. Trump said the US still had additional sanctions it could impose. He also described the naval blockade extremely effective, while saying the Strait of Hormuz remained open despite Tehran saying it was shut. He added that it could become less important as alternative energy supplies expand.
It'll either be extremely good and oil prices are going to drop like a rock, or we'll continue to do exactly what we're doing. You know, they were talking about $350 a barrel, and it's today 84, 85. And we are getting a lot of oil out. But the other thing that's happened is people have found other alternatives, which they never thought about. Texas, Alaska, Louisiana, and other places.
Trump also warned that countries allowing banks, businesses, airports or government entities to support Iran could face economic penalties. The warning comes after a 60-day ceasefire expired on Monday. Tehran said it's now gone from a defensive to a fully offensive military posture after Trump said he wouldn't renew the pause in fighting. Iran's central bank governor also said Washington had not yet released frozen Iranian funds required under a memorandum of understanding between the two sides. Meanwhile, the United Arab Emirates has announced it is cutting financial and economic ties with Iran, while Iraq has urged that its economic interests and particular circumstances be taken into account. Shipping through the Strait of Hormuz showed no increase on Wednesday as US-Iran diplomatic efforts remain deadlocked. The conflict has disrupted a vital global energy route, contributing to higher oil and gas prices.
Meanwhile, Iran's parliament speaker has met with Iraq leader in Baghdad to discuss regional stability and bilateral ties. Iraqi President Nizar Ahmedi reportedly emphasized the need for dialogue and diplomacy to end ongoing regional conflicts during his meeting with Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf. Turaj Shireliu has more from Tehran.
Iran's parliament speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf met his Iraqi counterpart as well as senior Iraqi officials during the first leg of his two-day visit to Baghdad. Before leaving Tehran on Wednesday, Ghalibaf said the talks would focus on strengthening bilateral relations and discussing regional developments. He also expressed hope that Iran and Iraq could contribute to shaping a new regional order without foreign involvement. According to Iranian state media, Ghalibaf and his Iraqi counterpart discussed accelerating work on the Shalamcha-Basra railway link and dredging the Arvand Rud waterway, which forms part of the Iran-Iraq border. Iraq's parliament speaker reportedly called for a special treatment for Iraqi oil exports passing through the Strait of Hormuz. Ghalibaf also held talks with Iraq's president and prime minister, stressing closer cooperation between Tehran and Baghdad on regional security and stability. Iran and Iraq fought an 8-year war from 1980 to 1988. Relations have since improved, with the two countries developing extensive political, economic, and security ties. Tehran also provided support to Baghdad in its campaign against ISIS after the group seized large parts of Iraqi territory. The current visit is expected to further discussions on infrastructure, trade, and regional cooperation between the two neighbors. Turaj Shireliu from Tehran for A News.
US President Donald Trump has reaffirmed his friendly relationship with North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un and criticised South Korea's lack of support over the US campaign in the Strait of Hormuz. Trump said Seoul had refused his request for help in the military campaign, despite relying on the US for around 60% of its oil. Meanwhile, Trump says Kim has responded after he reached out to him. He says he plans to meet the North Korean leader later this year and said the Asian nation held 57 very powerful nuclear weapons. However, Seoul believes Pyongyang has between 80 to 120 warheads. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump says he delayed the start of the new US tariff regime with Canada because he thought a deal had been reached with Prime Minister Mark Carney. The announcement of the pause came less than 2 hours before a 50% levy on nearly $20 billion worth of Canadian imports was set to begin at midnight on Wednesday. Senior trade representatives for both countries have been holding talks in Washington. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio is due to meet Canada's Foreign Minister at the White House later. Until a deal is formally reached, negotiators face a new deadline just after midnight on Saturday.
Although we probably have a deal with Canada, you probably saw that very major tariffs were going on to Canada today. We delayed it for 3 days because I think we have a deal with the Prime Minister and good deal for everybody. So that's good. But the construction jobs are enormous. We're building the biggest plants anywhere in the world.
The US national debt has hit a new milestone, surpassing $40 trillion for the first time. The figure highlights the scale of Washington's borrowing and growing concerns over the rising interest costs.
The United States national debt has surpassed $40 trillion for the first time, drawing fresh warnings that a fiscal crisis is brewing. It comes as costs balloon for social safety net programs and interest payments far outstrip revenues held back by tax cuts. The milestone comes just 5 months after the debt crossed $39 trillion, highlighting the rapid pace of government borrowing. Data from the US Treasury Department shows the outstanding balance is $40.047 trillion, which includes more than $32 trillion held by the public and nearly $7.8 trillion in intra-governmental debt. Interest payments are now among the largest federal expenses, with the Peter G. Peterson Foundation warning they are becoming a growing burden.
Interest is our fastest growing government program. So we spend more than $3 billion a day on interest costs. We spend more on interest than we do on national defense. We'll spend $16 trillion on interest over the next 10 years.
The amount owed has more than doubled since 2017, with pandemic-era borrowing accounting for a significant share of the increase. Budget watchdogs warn that continued borrowing could fuel inflation, limit government spending priorities and raise costs for households. The Peterson Foundation says changes to spending and tax policy could help reduce deficits without immediate drastic cuts.
It's a huge problem, it's an urgent priority, but we actually do know how to fix it, and we have the ability to fix it. So it's just a matter of the political courage and political will to get things started.
The record debt adds to pressure on lawmakers to put federal finances on a more sustainable path.
Israel's military is opening criminal probes into 2 high-profile Gaza cases, but says it will not prosecute anyone over the killing of 7 aid workers.
Israel's military has announced its first criminal investigations into the role its troops may have played in the deaths of 5-year-old Hind Rajab and her family, as well as 15 Palestinian paramedics, all killed in Gaza. Separately, the military said it would not pursue investigations into 3 other attacks, which killed aid workers from World Central Kitchen and Doctors Without Borders in 2024 and 2025. One of the workers was an Australian national. On Thursday, Australia's Foreign Minister Penny Wong summoned Israel's ambassador, condemning the decision not to pursue a criminal case.
Well, I think we have an Australian humanitarian worker who was killed, not on the first strike, but in the context of 3 separate strikes on a humanitarian convoy. I mean, obviously this is a difficult time in the relationship. And we've made our views clear about this issue. We've made our views clear about other issues. You've seen the Netanyahu government's response to some of those. I think we are realistic about that.
Israel's military, meanwhile, has said the attacks targeted Hamas and Hezbollah militants.
Circumstances, conditional aspects led the soldiers at the time to believe that this convoy had been taken over and controlled by Hamas, and they opened fire. Now, it was a mistake in retrospect, but the findings of the court are that there was no criminal intention, there was no intention to hit at aid workers, and therefore there's no criminal responsibility.
The UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs says Gaza has remained one of the world's deadliest places for aid workers for 3 consecutive years.
After the break, at least 13 are killed and dozens injured in Kyiv amid a massive Russian missile attack on Ukraine's capital. Stay with us on A News. Welcome back. You're watching A News. A deadly overnight Russian air assault has struck Ukraine's capital and surrounding areas, killing at least 13 people and injuring dozens more. Moscow says its forces targeted military-related facilities. Kyiv says civilian sites were also damaged and is calling for stronger air defences.
A day of mourning has been declared for Friday in Ukraine after at least a dozen people were killed in a large-scale Russian missile and drone attack overnight in Kyiv and the surrounding area. That's according to the capital's mayor, Vitaly Klitschko. Officials say more than 40 others were injured. Ukrainian authorities said the strikes damaged apartment buildings, warehouses, a school and a children's hospital across several districts of the capital. The country's air force said Russia launched dozens of hypersonic missiles, including ballistic and 168 drones. Officials said many were intercepted, but ballistic ones remained a major challenge. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has renewed calls for Western allies to provide more air defense missiles, particularly Patriot interceptors, saying shortages are leaving the capital vulnerable to ballistic attacks. Russia's defense ministry said the latest strikes targeted military facilities, including sites producing drone components, a military depot and a logistics hub. Separately, Russia and Ukraine exchanged 103 prisoners each in a United Arab Emirates-mediated swap, with the released Russian servicemen transferred to Belarus for medical assistance.
Ukraine's parliament has formally approved Yevgeny Kamara as the country's new defence minister. Following the vote, President Volodymyr Zelensky ordered him to rapidly expand Ukraine's capacity for deep military strikes. Zelensky says the immediate priority is overhauling domestic arms production and procurement systems. Kamara, who replaces the ousted Mikhailo Fedorov, has also been tasked with working alongside local manufacturers to strengthen the country's air defences.
My main task for the Minister of Defence of Ukraine in these circumstances is to effectively adjust our defence system, our production and procurement systems, and our supply chain to the armed forces. This adjustment that the protection of life in Ukraine receives everything necessary to repel Russian attacks, to hold our positions on the front line, and carry out our own active actions and deliver significant blows to Russia in response to its terror.
Poland has scrambled military aircraft and placed its air defence and radar systems on heightened readiness amid the increased attacks on Ukraine. Warsaw says necessary forces and resources had been activated in response to Russian long-range aviation activity. The aerial standby lasted for over 3 hours, standing down around 6:30 local time on Thursday morning. The military added that the operations were preventive, aimed at securing airspace and protecting citizens along its border with Ukraine. With me now to discuss the latest on the conflict amid the sudden upsurge in deadly strikes is Alexandra Filipenko, a political analyst. She joins us from Vilnius, Lithuania. Alexandra, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Now, as we've just heard in our stories there, civilian casualties and damage to residential areas again in the overnight attack on Kyiv. Russia used ballistic missiles alongside drones and other weapons. Now, what does the scale and structure of this latest round tell us about Russia's current strategy?
Yes, we now see that Russia is stockpiling weapons in order to hit Kyiv and the surrounding regions hard as they can. As of now, we know of 16 people that were killed in Kyiv and the Kyiv region. A children's hospital was damaged, the school was damaged, apartment buildings were hit. The mayor of Kyiv said that 1/3 of all apartment buildings in Kyiv were hit during the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, during Russia's attacks, and the weapons that Russia launched in those weapons tonight were actually North Korean weapons, North Korean ballistic missiles. North Korea has been providing Russia with weapons. This is what Russia actually needs very much. And previously, Ukrainian officials and Ukrainian military intelligence said that without North Korea, Russian artillery fire against Ukrainian defensive positions could have been cut roughly in half. While Reuters say that they examined Russian military documents and some intercepted reports, they have said that North Korean ammunition is becoming critical to Russian operations. In some Russian units, on some days like today, sometimes 75 or even 100% of ammunition is being fired is from North Korea. So right now, what we are seeing is Russia stockpiling weapons, buying weapons from North Korea, and trying to hit Kyiv hard and all the cities of Ukraine hard to make Ukrainians demand some kind of ceasefire and giving up of their territory demanded from their government.
Now, Alexandra, just days ago we were discussing Ukraine's shortage of missile interceptors, and Zelensky is again appealing for more air defense support after this attack. Is Russia now intentionally abusing what it sees as the weakest component of Ukraine's defenses, which is its ability to stop ballistic missiles?
This is the maybe not the only weak point, but the weakest point of Ukraine. And of course, Russia is trying to abuse its power as much as possible because on the front line, Russia is not that successful in the drone warfare. Of course, Ukraine is way more successful. The drone interceptors that the United States are interested in, Persian Gulf countries are interested in, many countries around the world are interested in Ukrainian drone technologies and anti-drone technologies. But with ballistic missiles, Ukraine doesn't have its own ballistic missiles enough production to hit Russia, and anti-ballistic missiles. That's what's most important. Mikhailo Fedorov, the former Minister of Defense of Ukraine, talked to CBS, to the American CBS news channel, and he said that probably it will take a few months, maybe half a year, maybe 6 months, for Ukraine to produce its own anti-ballistic weapon. But General Frost, as Americans put it, is coming fast. Russia is hoping to drag till winter, till the time when it can again hit Ukrainian infrastructure grid. And so people would be left without heating, without power, without light. The same thing that happened last winter. And of course, we understand winters in Ukraine get really, really cold. So Russia is trying to drag its feet, to drag some time until winter. And of course, is definitely using the weakest point right now, because Ukraine literally doesn't have Patriot missiles, and the United States cannot provide enough Patriot missiles. And there are European countries that might provide and that could have given up their Patriot missiles. But as it's been reported just before my arrival, of course, for example, Poland is very much nervous about how Russia might move into NATO alliance and what moves can Russia make regarding European countries. So European countries are, of course, thinking about their own defense first.
Mm-hmm. Now, as you said, Alexandra, Ukraine can intercept significant numbers of drones and cruise missiles, but ballistic and hypersonic weapons remain the more difficult problem. Does that mean the issue isn't simply giving Ukraine more air defense, but providing very specific systems such as additional Patriot capability? And how soon can they receive additional Patriots?
On the one hand, we know that, for example, Saudi Arabia ordered 720 Patriot missiles from the United States, and United States are supposed to provide Saudi Arabia those weapons. Lockheed Martin is supposed to provide them because they were bought by Saudi Arabia. Can Saudi Arabia provide those weapons? Can Saudi Arabia give those weapons to Ukraine in exchange for something, for example, anti-drone technologies? No one can be sure. Of course, it's a matter of negotiation. It's a matter of a very difficult diplomatic negotiation, but probably there are capabilities, but not from the United States part, because the Americans, as we understand, don't have enough stockpiles themselves after the operation against Iran, after the American operation, and an ongoing, we might say, conflict in the Persian Gulf. The United States are not ready to provide anything themselves. And Lockheed Martin, as we understand, are, I wouldn't say afraid, but they are a little bit nervous about giving Ukraine technologies for producing Patriot missiles, those licenses that President Trump talked to President Zelensky about in Ankara, in Turkey. But we haven't heard anything from Lockheed Martin, but we understand from different sources, from Bloomberg, from Wall Street Journal, and others, that Lockheed Martin are afraid that Ukraine can produce their own anti-ballistic missiles if they get the technologies, the licenses for Patriots. So this is not only about who can give the weapons, because there are European countries, maybe Saudi Arabia, but also that fear of giving Ukraine technologies for their own, for the production, potential production of their own anti-ballistic missiles. So we understand that some military contractors, some companies are thinking about, again, their own weapons, their own future, let's say the future of the companies, and are a bit afraid of Ukrainians producing their own missiles.
Is Russia increasing ballistic missile production?
Russia is increasing, and Russia is increasing buying ballistic missiles. Russia and North Korea are completing right now, as we speak, the first road bridge between two countries, between Russia and North Korea. And we understand that North Korea is providing ballistic missiles. They say, Russia and North Korea, they say it's for tourism. Well, I have some doubts about that, because the bridge is estimated to cost more than $100 million. Trade between Russia and North Korea in 2025 was about $30 million. So they're spending roughly 3 times 1 year's bilateral trade building a road connection. But if we talk about military explanation, that requires much less imagination, of course, because troops and weapons can move west this way, and Russia wants to pay for it, of course. And Russian technology, equipment, and resources can move east this way. So probably we will see more North Korean weapons, not only Russia producing, but also buying more from North Korea, and getting those weapons through that new bridge that is being finished right now.
Okay, now there's also pressure flowing in the other direction. Ukrainian strikes on Russian refineries have added to fuel shortages, severe enough that filling stations in Moscow are limiting gasoline purchases, and Russia has had to import refined products. How strategically significant is that?
That is, of course, extremely significant. The economic problems are real. Fuel shortages are real, although the government, Russian government, is trying to say that everything is fine and they will come up with a plan to stabilize the market very, very soon. They're not, of course, they're not answering any questions of any journalist. There is no free press in Russia, of course, we understand that. But also, even those journalists that are trying to ask the sweetest questions, they are not getting any answers from any representatives of the Kremlin. Russia is trying to buy gas. It's selling oil to India, it's selling oil to China. China is buying more Russian oil right now, and they want to buy gas from the refined oil from India. They are trying to find ways to get those gas to those gas stations, but as of now, there are only 30% of Russia's gas stations stations where there is enough gas. People have to line for hours, for 10, 12, 20 hours to fill their tanks. So this is a real problem, but it's a real problem for the economy. It's a real problem for Russian military machine being fueled by the money coming in from people. But we understand that it won't mean any protests, let's say, in Russia, because the system will not allow any protests. That is for sure. People, I doubt that people or anyone will come out on the streets to protest, because you can get to jail for 10, 20 years in jail for lesser, for just talking about the problems with Russian economy. But this is significant, especially coming back to North Korea and buying weapons, because Russia cannot produce enough right now. It needs to buy more from, for example, North Korea and from other countries, or Shahed drones from Iran. So this may lead to real problems for industrial military complex, but not for the Kremlin. I mean, not for seeing anyone opposing the Kremlin on the streets of Moscow or other Russian cities.
Okay, Alexandra, it's always a pleasure having you on the program. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
As we've been hearing, motorists in Moscow are facing long queues and strict purchasing limits as fuel shortages hit the Russian capital. The disruption follows months of targeted Ukrainian drone strikes on oil refineries, compounded by growing seasonal demand. Major suppliers have now capped how much gasoline that drivers can buy on a single trip.
The daily commute in Moscow now includes a hunt for petrol. Across the capital and surrounding regions, drivers are facing closed stations, dry pumps, and long waits. Shortages that began in the Russian provinces earlier this summer have now firmly taken hold in the city, forcing motorists to drive from station to station just to fill their tanks.
We have been to 5 petrol stations already, and there was no fuel. Last week, fuel was available, and now there is no fuel again.
To preserve dwindling supplies, Russia's major oil companies have introduced strict rationing. Rosneft has capped gasoline sales at just 30 litres per vehicle, while Gazprom Neft and Tatneft have imposed similar limits. The suppliers blame elevated demand and unscheduled maintenance. However, the underlying cause is the ongoing war. Ukraine has systematically targeted Russian refineries this year, aiming to disrupt Moscow's military logistics and cut into its crucial energy revenues.
Everything is very bad. To find fuel, you probably need to drive across half of Moscow. And even in this case, you will not find it. You will have to wait for 2 or 3 hours in a queue.
The Kremlin is taking emergency measures to shield the domestic market. Authorities have banned fuel exports, relaxed quality standards, and even started importing petroleum products to boost supply.
German investors have made a second arrest over the sabotage of the Nord Stream gas pipeline. A Ukrainian suspect has been detained in Croatia under a European arrest warrant, accused of allegedly helping plant the explosives in 2022. Anita Sharma has more.
Welcome to This Day in Europe, where Germany makes another major breakthrough in the investigation into the Nord Stream sabotage. A second Ukrainian suspect was arrested over the 2022 explosions that severely damaged the Nord Stream gas pipelines beneath the Baltic Sea. German prosecutors identify him as Vladimir Zhuravlyov, a trained scuba diver arrested in Croatia under a European warrant. They allege he was part of a team that rented a yacht in Germany and planted explosives on the pipelines near the Danish island of Bornholm. But this is not Zhuravlyov's first arrest. He was actually detained in Poland last year, only for a Polish court to reject Germany's extradition request, with the judge arguing that if Ukraine was responsible, the attack could be considered a legitimate act of war. The other suspect, former Ukrainian military officer Sergei Kuznetsov, was arrested in Italy and extradited to Germany. Prosecutors accuse him of leading the operation, but he denies responsibility. The blast ruptured 3 of Nord Stream's 4 pipelines. Initial suspicion focused on Russia before evidence began pointing toward possible Ukrainian involvement. Kyiv has repeatedly denied any role. The pipelines have long divided Europe. Germany championed Nord Stream as a source of Russian gas, while Poland, Ukraine, and the U.S. warned it left Berlin dangerously dependent on Moscow. German prosecutors believe the aim of the sabotage was to permanently cut those gas links and deny Moscow future energy revenues. And the case now carries an uncomfortable political dimension. Germany pursuing allegations of Ukrainian involvement in an attack on its energy infrastructure, even as Berlin remains one of Kyiv's most important supporters. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
Turkey looks set to host another meeting of the so-called Regional 4 group of foreign ministers in Istanbul later this month. It comes as Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan invited his Pakistani counterpart to attend. The R4 group, which includes Saudi Arabia and Egypt, was formed in March to coordinate diplomatic efforts over Middle Eastern security. Adam Morrow has more from Istanbul.
Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan has invited Ishak Dar, Pakistan's Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister, to Istanbul for a possible meeting of the Regional 4, or R4, group of foreign ministers. According to Pakistan's Foreign Office, the invitation was extended in a Wednesday telephone call in which the two top diplomats also discussed joint efforts to promote regional peace and stability. Dar accepted the invitation and confirmed that he would attend the meeting, which Pakistan says is expected to take place in Istanbul later this month. Ankara, however, has yet to announce an exact date for the tentative meeting. The R4, which includes Turkey, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt, has emerged as a regular consultation mechanism on Middle Eastern security issues. The 4 foreign ministers last met in Amman, Jordan, on August 5th on the sidelines of a ministerial gathering focused on Jerusalem. At that meeting, they reaffirmed support for an independent Palestinian state based on pre-1967 borders, while stressing the need for enhanced diplomatic coordination to prevent further regional escalation. In June, the group held its 4th formal meeting in Cairo, where talks focused on de-escalation and efforts to achieve regional stability. The possible upcoming meeting in Istanbul would come as the 4 countries deepen coordination on regional security challenges, including the ongoing conflict between Iran and the United States. Fidan has described the 4-country platform as an increasingly important regional mechanism. The meeting would also come shortly after Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan signed a landmark joint defense pact in Mecca, adding a key security aspect to relations between 3 of the 4 R4 members. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
Turkey has said it's ready to work with Damascus to search for oil and gas in Syria. Speaking in the Syrian capital, Energy Minister Alparslan Bayraktar said Turkish state oil company and private companies are prepared to carry out seismic surveys and exploration drilling, both offshore and onshore. Bayraktar also announced that Turkey and Syria will soon commission new infrastructure that will nearly triple electricity transmission capacity to more than 800 megawatts. The 2 countries also signed a memorandum of understanding on phosphate resources. Meanwhile, Israel has warned it will not tolerate any Turkish military presence in Syria that it considers a threat to its own security. The latest exchange has further deepened tensions between the 2 regional powers. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu issued the warning after Israeli strikes hit the Abu Durur air base in northern Syria, hours after a Turkish delegation had visited the facility. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz accused President Erdogan of dragging Turkey into what it called dangerous adventures in Syria. He warned him against testing Israel's determination to defend itself. Turkey rejected Israel's claims as unfounded and accused Netanyahu of trying to justify strikes on Syrian territory. Syrian Foreign Minister Assad Hassan al-Shaibani has arrived in Islamabad for talks with Pakistani leaders on bilateral ties and regional developments. Al-Shaibani, who is leading a high-level delegation, met with his Pakistani counterpart and is also expected to hold talks with Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif and other senior officials. The visit marks the first trip by a Syrian foreign minister to Pakistan in 19 years and comes amid heightened regional tensions. The two sides are expected to discuss ways to strengthen cooperation. Earlier, we spoke with Lamis Jadid, political analyst from Geneva, about Pakistan's emerging role as a regional mediator, balancing new partnerships with wider geopolitical tensions.
Pakistan is playing a role of mediation now, and we all know that it really functioned well regarding the war on the Hormuz Strait and between America and Iran. So Pakistan now is trying to be as much as useful for the security of the whole region, but also maybe for shaping the new corridors that might be an alternative to Hormuz and the cut of energy that's happening in Hormuz. Syria, as we said just in your program just now, they said that they are willing really to go for exploring more opportunities in the gas, Mediterranean gas. Turkey is interested, and now while Syria is under the sphere of the Turkish influence in a way, it might be interesting for the three countries to have more other countries joining, especially the Prime Minister, Pakistani Prime Minister. He invited so many other Muslim countries, as he said, though there is not such a word as Muslim. Islam is fractioned now as never before, and clearly he invited Sunni countries, other Sunni countries, or not even other Sunni countries that are falling under the same agenda of the maybe American agenda in the region. But all this alliance might provoke many other reactions from other countries like India, like Israel, security concerns. So we will wait and we will see maybe a quantity of the response or the amount of the response, or maybe other alliance that might be formed as a response to what might come if Syria or even Egypt enter this alliance.
The World Health Organization says it can still contain the second deadliest Ebola outbreak on record, despite the virus spreading to a sixth province in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The disease has killed at least 2,325 people. World Health Organization officials warn that stopping the spread requires more funding. The agency has currently raised just 60% of its financial target.
Together, the contributions have reached $69.3 million of the $115 million currently required for WHO's life-saving operations, a critical pillar of the broader response, led with governments, communities and partners, including Africa's CDC. As countries strengthen coordinated cross-border actions, we call for the rapid disbursement of pledged funds and additional flexible financing to help stop transmission, save lives, and protect regional and global health security.
The death toll from a 7.4 magnitude earthquake in Western Colombia has risen to 314, according to new figures. The National Unit for Disaster Risk Management says hundreds remain missing and more than 4,000 have been injured, while hundreds have been rescued from the rubble. More than 260,000 people have been affected, with tens of thousands of homes destroyed. Search and rescue operations are continuing as authorities assess the damage. The quake struck 10 days ago near San Jose del Palmar in the Choco region, making it the strongest seismic event to hit the country so far this century. After the break, we'll look at more stories shaping the region. Welcome back. You're watching A News. Kazakhstan is entering the final days of campaigning ahead of Sunday's parliamentary election. Parties are making their last push for votes before campaigning officially ends. Fariza Kalimurzina has more from Almaty.
Kazakhstan is heading into a parliamentary election that will look very different from previous votes. The election on August 23rd will be the first held under the country's new constitution, approved in a referendum in March and in force since July 1st. The parliamentary system has changed significantly. The former two-chamber parliament made up of the Senate and the Majlis has been replaced by a unicameral parliament known as the Kurultai with 145 seats. For voters, the key change is how those seats will be filled. All members will now be elected through party lists with no single-member districts. And under this new system, 7 parties are contesting the election. Together, they have nominated 545 candidates, including 172 women. The average age is just over 45. Among them, the main newcomer is Adilet. It was registered in June, becoming the first new party to secure registration in 3 years. But the biggest political development came when Amanat, formerly Nurotan, and the country's dominant political force for decades, merged with Adilet. And it's not only the party landscape that is changing. The new parliamentary structure also means there will be 1 speaker instead of 2, a position likely to carry greater influence. The election will be observed by 777 international monitors from 42 countries and 13 international organizations. And in just 3 days, voters will cast their ballots for one of 7 parties or choose the against all option. The vote will determine the first composition of Kazakhstan's new Kurultai. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A News.
Uzbekistan and Azerbaijan are looking to expand economic ties, with the 2 countries targeting $1 billion in bilateral trade by the end of the decade. Both sides preparing a new roadmap to support investment and business cooperation, as Sevil Rajapova reports from Tashkent.
Uzbekistan and Azerbaijan are preparing a program aimed at increasing bilateral trade to $1 billion by 2030. The target was discussed during a meeting between Uzbekistan's Investment, Industry and Trade Minister Laziz Kudratov and Azerbaijan's ambassador to Uzbekistan Rashad Mamadov. Trade between the 2 countries reached $307 million in 2025. Up nearly 15% from the previous year. In the first half of 2026, turnover rose by more than 30% year-on-year, reaching $170 million. The growth has been driven by increasingly diversified trade, ranging from food products and manufactured goods to vehicles, machinery, and industrial materials. Azerbaijan also plays an important role as a transport link, connecting Uzbekistan with the South Caucasus and European markets through the Caspian Sea. The sides are now preparing a roadmap to implement existing agreements and expand trade and investment cooperation. They are also looking to strengthen direct links between businesses and regions in both countries. With trade already showing strong growth, Tashkent and Baku are now seeking to turn this momentum into long-term economic cooperation and reach the $1 billion trade target by 2030. Sevil Rajapova reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A News.
Nigerian cocoa farmers are working to comply with the European Union's new anti-deforestation rules. The requirements include mapping farms and tracing the origin of cocoa products. Exporters say the new system is creating additional financial pressure for both farmers and companies in West Africa.
Ojo Ayani Nwola is a small-scale cocoa farmer in Akure, southwestern Nigeria. He was initially reluctant to allow his farm to be mapped because of the European Union's new anti-deforestation rules. But Sunbeth Global, one of the country's major cocoa exporters, warned him that he could lose access to the EU market if he failed to comply with the rules. The EU buys around 60% of the world's cocoa. Ayaninuola eventually agreed. The farmer says he inherited the land from his father. Sambeth explained the rules he must follow on his farm. Farmers have been told not to cut down trees or employ children. The EU's new rules aim to prevent deforestation. Under the rules, importers must prove that their products were not grown on land where forests have been cleared. They must also identify exactly where the products were grown. The EU Deforestation Regulation, or EUDR, has been delayed twice. The new rules also require importers to prove that products were produced in line with the laws of their country of origin. Experts say many farmers in Nigeria may struggle to meet the EU requirements once the rules come into force. Nigeria has around 300,000 cocoa farmers, most of them small-scale producers. Cocoa buyers say complying with the new rules is expensive. The problem is particularly serious in Nigeria, Ivory Coast and Ghana, where hundreds of thousands of small-scale farmers live in remote rural areas. Exporters must map all farms. They must also check how the land is being used. In addition, they need to create digital systems to trace the origin of the cocoa.
It's expensive, $30, $70 per metric ton. Who's going to bear the cost? The off-takers, current conversations, off-takers are telling us that, oh, it's part of your is expected. We're saying, no, this is an additional compliance, right? So as Europe is thinking about all of these regulations, they need to think about the cost implications, right? Because the cost-benefit analysis right now is dipping into our margins.
Nigeria's major cocoa exporters say the process is very costly. EU buyers, however, are not yet willing to cover the additional costs. The company has spent the past 3 years training farmers to comply with Nigerian laws. Hundreds of staff have been involved in the programme. The training also covers the bans on child and forced labour.
The World Robot Conference has opened in Beijing. Robot martial arts and dance performances have attracted particular attention at the event. Experts attending the conference have highlighted China's rapid advances in the field.
The 2026 World Robot Conference has opened in Beijing. More than 300 Chinese and international companies are taking part in this year's event, showcasing more than 3,000 new robotics technologies and innovative products.
The robot dance, very interesting. I think the technology is advancing quite a bit, as we saw in the marathon, and each year that I come to WRC, I see new advancements. I'm very impressed by what I see that Beijing is doing, and throughout China, there's a lot of adoption of robotics.
The opening ceremony also featured a special performance by robots demonstrating martial arts, which attracted considerable interest from visitors.
I'm a fifth time here, but every year I see an enormous progress. I mean, robotics is making major progress. It's amazing to see this.
China continues to make significant advances in robotics each year, and is now considered one of the global leaders in the field.
You're up to date with world news for the hour. Stay tuned to A News.